Okay, so you want to own an airline, not fly one, not work for one. Own one. Have your name on the tail, your logo on 10,000 baggage tags, your face on the cover of an in-flight magazine nobody reads. Find the planes, hire the pilots, sell the tickets, watch the money roll in. That's the idea. Anyway, here's what's actually going on underneath that idea. The first thing you need to understand is why anyone wants this in the first place. Because on paper, it makes almost no sense. You are about to enter one of the only industries in the world where you can move a human being across an entire continent at 500 miles an hour, feed them, entertain them, get them there safely, and still only make about $12 of profit off of them. Apple makes more money selling a rubber phone case than an airline makes flying you from New York to Los Angeles. So why do people still want in? Prestige, mostly. An airline is a flying billboard. Every time one of your planes takes off, your brand is visible from the ground, from the terminal, from the in-flight app on 10,000 phones. It's also a matter of national importance. Airlines move cargo, move business travelers, move soldiers, and diplomats when governments need them to. Owning one puts you in a room most billionaires never get invited into. And there's global reach. Very few businesses let you say you have a physical presence on 6 continents by Thursday afternoon. That's the appeal. Now let's talk about what it costs to actually do this. First, you need permission. In the United States, you can't just buy some planes and start selling tickets. You need 2 separate approvals from 2 separate federal agencies. The Department of Transportation has to certify that you are, in their language, economically fit, meaning you have enough money to survive, a real operating plan, and management that knows what it's doing. The Federal Aviation Administration has to certify that you are safe enough to fly, which usually means a Part 121 air carrier certificate if you want to run scheduled commercial flights. The DOT doesn't just ask if you have money. They ask if you have enough money to cover every pre-operating expense, plus a reserve equal to 3 full months of normal operating costs, before you've sold a single ticket. When Breeze Airways entered the US market a few years ago, they didn't scrape by. They raised over $300 million before they ever got off the ground, an $83 million Series A round, followed by a $200 million Series B. That's the price of admission just to be taken seriously by regulators. And that's before a single plane has a single passenger in a single seat, and there's a citizenship requirement most people don't know about. US law requires that American citizens control at least 75% of the voting interest in the airline. The president and 2/3 of the board have to be American citizens too. This isn't a suggestion. It's federal law, designed to keep foreign governments from quietly controlling US transportation infrastructure. You also need people. Real, specific, government-mandated people. A director of safety, a director of operations, a chief pilot, a director of maintenance, a chief inspector. These aren't job titles you can invent later. The law requires you to have them before you fly, and the people filling those seats need serious credentials, like an airline transport pilot certificate and years of supervisory experience on large aircraft. You're not hiring 5 employees. You're hiring 5 extremely specific and extremely expensive experts, and you're competing with every other airline in the country for the same small pool of them. So that's the entry fee just to exist as a legal airline. Now let's talk about the actual product, the planes. The commercial aircraft market is essentially a 2-company monopoly, Boeing and Airbus. That's it. Those are your options if you want a new aircraft. And here's the first trap. The prices you see reported in the news are almost never the prices anyone actually pays. A Boeing 737 MAX 8 has a published list price north of $117 million. Nobody pays that. Real transaction prices, after volume discounts and negotiation, usually land somewhere between $50 million and $65 million. The Airbus A320neo, its direct competitor, follows the same pattern. List price around $110 million. Real price in that same $50 to $65 million range move up to wide-body aircraft, the ones used for long international routes, and the numbers get considerably more painful. A Boeing 787-9 lists near $292 million, with real prices ranging anywhere from $75 million up to $161 million depending on configuration. An Airbus A350-1000 can run you anywhere from $180 million to $230 million, even after negotiation. Regional aircraft, the smaller jets that feed passengers from tiny cities into major hubs, are comparatively cheap. An Embraer E175 runs $25 to $28 million. But cheap is relative. You still need a fleet of them, and each one still needs a full maintenance program, full crew, and full insurance. Here's where the first real decision point shows up. Do you buy these planes outright, or do you lease them? Almost nobody buys outright anymore. The global aircraft leasing market is projected to hit $229.6 billion by 2026, And there's a reason for that. Leasing means you're not tying up hundreds of millions of dollars of your own capital in a depreciating hunk of metal. It means the leasing company, not you, absorbs the risk if the aircraft's resale value collapses. And it gives you flexibility to grow or shrink your fleet as demand changes, instead of being stuck owning planes you no longer need. Most leases are what's called a dry lease. You get the aircraft, and you bring your own crew, your own maintenance program, your own insurance. Over 83% of the leasing market works this way. There's also wet leasing, where the leasing company gives you the aircraft, the crew, the maintenance, and the insurance as one complete package. Useful in an emergency or for short bursts of extra capacity, but expensive, because you're seeing someone else to handle everything. There's also a clever trick some airlines use called a sale-leaseback. You buy a brand new aircraft directly from Boeing or Airbus. Then, almost immediately, you sell it to a leasing company like AerCap or Air Lease Corporation. Then you sign a long-term lease to fly the exact same plane you just sold. Why would anyone do this? Because it instantly puts cash back on your balance sheet while your operations continue without a single day of interruption. It sounds like financial sleight of hand, and honestly, it kind of is. But it's completely legal and extremely common. So now you have your license, your mandatory executives, and your fleet, either bought or leased. Time to figure out how you're actually going to run the airline, because there isn't just one way to do this. There are three basic models. Full-service carriers, like Delta, United, and American, run what's called a hub-and-spoke system. Passengers from dozens of smaller cities all funnel into a handful of massive hub airports, then get redistributed to their final destinations. It's inefficient in some ways, more congestion, more delay risk, more overhead. But it's the only mathematically sound way to gather enough passengers in one place to fill an international wide-body flight, which is where the real profit is. Low-cost carriers, like Southwest, skip the hub entirely and fly point to point. City to city, direct, no funneling. Planes spend less time sitting on the ground, turn around faster, and the whole operation is simpler. Ultra-low-cost carriers, like Spirit and Frontier, take that same point-to-point model and strip it down even further. Every single extra is unbundled and sold separately. The base ticket is often sold at a loss on purpose. The airline survives entirely on what you pay for beyond the seat itself, which brings us to one of the strangest hidden assets in the entire industry, the airport slot. At certain airports, JFK, LaGuardia, Reagan National, and Washington, there are only so many takeoffs and landings the runways can physically handle in a day. So the FAA hands out a fixed number of slots, and if you don't have one, you cannot land there. Period. Doesn't matter how big your airline is. To keep your slot, you have to actually use it, at least 80% of the time during a scheduling season, or you lose it. This is called use it or lose it, and it turns a slot into one of the most valuable pieces of intangible property in the entire industry. At major global hubs, a single prime slot pair, one takeoff, one landing, has sold on the secondary market for as much as $75 million for a right to land a plane. Not the plane, just the right to land it. Now let's get into the costs that actually eat your revenue every single day you operate, because this is where most people's mental math falls apart. In 2024, the average cost of running a US passenger aircraft came out to $100.76 per minute of block time, meaning every minute from the second, the aircraft starts moving to the second it parks at the gate. Every minute. Whether the flight is full or empty. Labor is the single biggest piece of that, at $35.23 per block minute. And labor costs have changed dramatically in the last few years because of a pilot shortage, especially at the regional level. A first-year first officer at a regional airline can now expect to make between $75,000 and $100,000, a number that would have seemed absurd a decade ago. Senior regional captains can clear over $150,000 to $200,000. At the legacy level, Delta, United, American, a senior wide-body captain with 12 years of experience can pull in $350,000 to $500,000 annually once profit sharing is included. Flight attendants have their own quiet history of being underpaid in a very specific way. For decades, flight attendants were only paid once the aircraft doors closed and the brakes released, meaning the entire boarding process, sometimes 45 minutes of work, was completely unpaid. That changed recently. A historic 2026 agreement at United finally introduced boarding pay, compensated at half the normal hourly rate during the scheduled boarding window. Entry-level flight attendants still start relatively low, around $27,000 to $35,000 in their first year, largely because new hires spend much of that time on reserve status, meaning they're on call and can be summoned to fly with almost no notice. But senior pursers on international wide-body routes, with language skills and years of seniority, can make anywhere from $115,000 to $140,000 a year. Fuel is the second biggest cost. averaging $33.06 per block minute. And fuel is genuinely one of the scariest line items in this entire industry because you don't control the price. Crude oil prices swing. Refining margins, what's called the crack spread, the premium refineries charge to turn crude oil into usable jet fuel, can spike without warning, sometimes adding $60 or more to the cost of a single barrel overnight. To protect against this, airlines hedge fuel costs, essentially locking in a future price today through financial contracts. Sounds smart. Here's the trap. If oil prices later fall, the airline is stuck paying the higher locked-in price anyway, sometimes absorbing billions in losses on contracts that seemed brilliant the day they were signed. Delta tried something different. In 2012, they bought an actual oil refinery in Pennsylvania for $150 million. Analysts mocked the decision at the time. An airline running a refinery seemed like a distraction from their real business. But the logic was simple. When the crack spread spikes and every other airline is bleeding money on fuel, Delta's refinery profits from that exact same spike because refining is exactly what a refinery does. During periods of extreme market dislocation, that one refinery has generated between $300 million and $785 million of relief for the company. The lesson here isn't buy a refinery. It's that in an industry where you don't control your biggest cost, sometimes the only real hedge is owning the thing that creates the cost in the first place. Maintenance eats another 10 to 15% of total operating costs, or about $18.30 per block minute. And maintenance isn't optional or flexible. It's a strict, tiered system of inspections. A check happens roughly every 2 to 3 months, takes 50 to 130 labor hours, usually overnight. C-check happens every 20 to 24 months, takes up to 6,000 labor hours, keeps the aircraft grounded for 1 to 4 weeks, and costs between $800,000 and $1.5 million for a narrow-body jet. D-check, the big one, happens every 6 to 12 years, and it means essentially disassembling the entire aircraft down to bare metal, removing the engines and landing gear, rebuilding everything. That process alone consumes 30 to 50,000 labor hours, costs $1.5 to $3 million, and grounds the aircraft for 4 to 6 weeks straight. 6 weeks where that airplane is earning you exactly $0 while still costing you money to store and insure. And engines are their own universe of expense. A single performance restoration on a modern narrow-body engine easily exceeds $1.5 million. If the engine's internal life-limited parts need full replacement, the components with a hard expiration date, no matter how well maintained, a full overhaul on a wide-body engine can run $8 to $12 million per engine. Then there's insurance, which most people never think about until something goes wrong. Global aviation insurance premiums exceed $8 billion a year, usually running 1 to 2% of an airline's total operating expenses. Hull insurance, which covers physical damage to the aircraft, typically costs 0.6 to 1.5% of the aircraft's insured value every single year. Passenger liability insurance has to cover the fact that U.S. courts routinely award enormous settlements. The average value assigned to a single life lost in a U.S. aviation accident sits around $5.2 million, and airlines need to carry coverage that can absorb dozens of those claims at once if the worst happens. War risk insurance, which covers terrorism and conflict zones, has seen premiums surge by 50 to 500% in recent years as global instability spreads and insurers reprice risk almost in real time. Airport fees are next, and they work like a local monopoly tax. Airports charge rent per square foot for ticket counters, gates, and baggage areas. A major hub-dependent airline can pay over $400,000 a month just in terminal rent. Landing fees are based on aircraft weight. At JFK, for example, it's $8.47 per 1,000 pounds, meaning a Boeing 737 pays roughly $600 to $700 just to touch down, while a fully loaded wide-body pays thousands per landing. Air traffic control is funded differently depending on where you fly. In Europe, airlines are billed directly based on aircraft weight and distance flown, generating over 13.2 billion euros a year for the system. In the US, it's the opposite. Instead of billing the airline, the government taxes the passenger directly through a 7.5% ticket tax, a $5.20 domestic segment fee, and a small excise tax on jet fuel. The one place the FAA does bill airlines directly is for aircraft that fly over the US without landing. $61.75 per 100 nautical miles for regular airspace, $26.51 for oceanic routes. Ground handling and catering round out the daily grind. Loading bags, refueling, catering, pushback, all of it either done in-house or paid to a third party per turnaround. An economy meal costs the airline $5 to $15 to produce. Business class jumps to $30 to $50. First class with a celebrity chef attached can run $100 to $300 per passenger, and airlines are notoriously obsessive about shaving pennies here. American Airlines once saved $40,000 a year just by removing a single olive from their first-class salads, so that's the cost side. A relentless, stacking pile of expenses that exist whether your plane flies full or empty. Now let's talk about how you actually make money back, because this is where the story gets interesting. The core mechanism is yield management. An airline seat is the most perishable product in the world. The moment that plane pushes back from the gate, every empty seat on it represents revenue that is gone forever. You can't sell it tomorrow. It's just lost. So airlines divide every flight into dozens of invisible price tiers called fare buckets. Months before departure, they release the cheapest buckets aimed at price-sensitive leisure travelers who book early. As the flight fills up, the algorithm closes those cheap buckets one by one until, close to departure, only the most expensive fares remain, aimed squarely at business travelers who need to fly regardless of price and are booking at the last minute. This is why two people sitting next to each other can pay wildly different prices for the identical seat. It's not random. It's precision-targeted revenue extraction, recalculated constantly based on demand, competitor pricing, and how fast the plane is filling up. To distribute these fares to travel agencies and corporate booking systems, airlines rely on global distribution systems: Sabre, Amadeus, Travelport. Every ticket sold through these systems costs the airline $12 to $26, or 2 to 4% of the ticket price, in fees. Which is exactly why airlines beg you to book directly on their own website instead. The industry's break-even load factor, the percentage of seats that must be sold just to cover a flight's costs, is brutally high, and the global passenger load factor is forecast to hit a record 83.8% in 2026. That means airlines are now designed structurally to fly almost completely full planes just to survive, let alone profit. Beneath the passenger cabin, cargo is a quiet but massive source of income. Belly freight, mail contracts, e-commerce packages. Global airline cargo revenue is projected to hit $158 billion in 2026. And above the cabin, the unbundling of the ticket itself has created an entire secondary economy. Checked bag fees, seat selection, priority boarding, Wi-Fi. Ancillary revenue now makes up nearly 14% of total industry revenue, and for ultra-low-cost carriers, it isn't a bonus. It's the entire business model. The ticket price is bait. The fees are the meal. But here's the part almost nobody outside the industry understands, and it's the single most important structural fact in modern airline economics. The actual biggest moneymaker at a major airline is not flying planes. It's the loyalty program. Airlines mint frequent flyer miles at essentially zero cost. They're just numbers in a database. Then they sell those miles in enormous bulk to banks like American Express and Chase, who use them to attract credit card customers. In 2026, Delta alone reported over $8.4 billion in annual revenue from its co-branded card partnership with American Express. $8.4 billion from a loyalty program, dwarfing what many entire airlines earn from flying passengers. This is such a significant shift that the major U.S. carriers have completely abandoned the old system of earning miles based on distance flown. Now, miles and elite status are earned based on how much money you spend, meaning your credit card spending matters more to your airline status than the number of miles you've actually flown. In a very real sense, the airline itself has become a marketing and data collection subsidiary of a bank, one that happens to also operate airplanes. Now for the volatility, the part of the story where the math you just did stops being reliable. Airlines run on razor-thin margins even in a good year. The global airline industry's net profit margin is forecast to sit at just 3.9% in 2026, meaning a projected net profit of about $7.90 per passenger globally. U.S. carriers do slightly better at around $11.80 per passenger. That's not the ticket price. That's the entire profit, after every single cost we just walked through, per person, per flight. And that thin margin has almost no cushion against shocks. Fuel prices spike without warning. Pandemics ground entire fleets overnight. Interest rates rise and crush highly leveraged balance sheets. When any of these hit an airline that's already carrying enormous fixed costs and heavy debt, the result is often bankruptcies. Spirit Airlines is the clearest recent example. In late 2024, Spirit filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and by 2025 it was back in a second round of restructuring. It wasn't one single mistake. It was three things landing at once. A wave of Pratt & Whitney engine recalls that grounded a huge portion of its fleet. A proposed $3.8 billion acquisition by JetBlue that got blocked by federal antitrust regulators. And relentless price competition from legacy carriers who introduced stripped-down basic economy fares specifically to poach Spirit's price-sensitive customers using their own superior route networks. Spirit understood the ultra-low-cost model better than almost anyone in the industry. It still nearly collapsed twice. That's the honest lesson of this entire sector. Expertise doesn't protect you from structural risk. The system itself can shift under even the smartest operators. Delays and cancellations pile onto this volatility. A delay costs a U.S. airline that same $100.76 per minute in direct costs, and delays cascade. Crew members time out under FAA rest rules, forcing cancellations of flights that had nothing to do with the original problem. Nationally, the FAA estimates delays cost airlines and passengers over $33 billion a year. And in 2024, the Department of Transportation made this more expensive for airlines by requiring automatic cash refunds for major delays and cancellations, closing the old loophole where airlines could just hand out travel vouchers and hold on to the cash. Environmental costs are the newest volatility factor. Sustainable aviation fuel can cut life cycle emissions by up to 80%, but it costs 2 to 4 times as much as regular jet fuel, and that premium is structural, not temporary. The government offers tax credits up to $1.75 per gallon to soften that gap, but airlines are also bound internationally by a program called COSIA, which requires them to purchase carbon credits to offset emissions growth on international routes. Analysts estimate this could cost the global airline industry up to $127 billion between 2024 and 2035. So let's run the two scenarios, the way you'd actually have to think about this if you were the one signing the checks. The optimistic case. You run a well-capitalized full-service carrier with strong hub dominance, valuable airport slots, and a thriving co-branded credit card partnership. Your load factors sit near that record 83.8%. Fuel prices stay stable. Your loyalty program alone generates billions in high-margin revenue, insulating your thin flying margins. In this world, the airline is less a transportation company and more a marketing arm for a bank, one that happens to be extremely profitable, the realistic case. Fuel prices spike unexpectedly. A round of engine recalls grounds part of your fleet. A competitor undercuts your fares on your busiest routes. Your maintenance bills come due at the worst possible time. Your margin, already sitting at just a few percent, evaporates completely, and instead of counting $11 of profit per passenger, you're counting losses in the hundreds of millions the way Spirit did, twice. The difference between those two scenarios isn't a rounding error. It's the difference between a company throwing off billions in loyalty revenue and a company filing for Chapter 11. And the entire industry sits on that knife's edge permanently because the base business, the actual flying, was never designed to be highly profitable on its own. So if you still want to own an airline, understand what you're actually buying. You're not buying a transportation company. You're buying a capital-intensive, thinly margined, brutally regulated operation that happens to come attached to something genuinely valuable. A loyalty program, a slot portfolio, a brand. The planes are almost a cost of doing business. The real asset was never in the sky. It was in the wallet of everyone who ever swiped a co-branded card just to earn a few extra miles.